So you've been a busy person this year in 2021. You just recently hired a CFO from a kind of a small hedge fund called Bridgewater. You announced a partnership with FIS to offer Bitcoin trading to hundreds of banks. You raised equity capital into NYDIG from some small institutions like Mass Mutual, Liberty Mutual, New York Life, Morgan Stanley.
When the Fed creates $3 trillion of money in a matter of weeks by pushing a button, it consolidates the power to price and value human time. That is not okay. Humans are not supposed to have that kind of power over other humans. Time is all we have. Time is all we have. So when Powell says, for example, as a practical reaction to that, we're not even thinking of raising rates, which he said last June, which is a translation of we're not even thinking about stop the printing. At Stone Ridge, what we said to ourselves is, okay, we're not even thinking about not buying more Bitcoin. And we did. More Bitcoin last year than the previous 5 years combined. And we're on quite a big pace this year as well.
That's an amazing point. I don't think people would necessarily guess that. I think people would have guessed, oh, we bought a bunch of Bitcoin way back when no one knew about it and just held all the way through. But can you repeat that again? You bought more Bitcoin
in 2020 than the previous 5 years combined. And we're on a pace to buy even more this year. Why? Time. Bitcoin is our peaceful weapon of choice against central bank-driven time theft. Not on my watch. I'm not letting the central banks steal the time of my partners, my colleagues, and my clients. Absolutely not. Bitcoin is our peaceful weapon of choice. Bitcoin doesn't work like that. It does not work like that. Bitcoin supply, unlike gold, cannot be increased regardless of the level of demand. So if Bitcoin's at 55,000 and tonight it goes to 155,000 or 255,000, that's outrageous. Not going to tonight. It will eventually, I think. What's going to happen tomorrow to Bitcoin supply versus what was expected? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The supply of Bitcoin, the new supply every year, the inflation of the amount that's printed, so to speak, is on an asymptotic journey to zero, predictably over time. It's already on sort of the planet of that gold right now. And what's just mind-boggling about that is Bitcoin is the first store of value in human history whose supply is completely impervious to any amount of increased demand. And I think the thing that shifted the most, if you are an allocator, is that Bitcoin is de-risked. That's really the thing that shifted. And if you ask me, why did we buy more Bitcoin last year than the 5 years before? It's simply and only because of that. It's been de-risked.
What's de-risked?
What's been de-risked is the left tail of zero. Bitcoin going away. Bitcoin is not going away.
It's too entrenched. It's too involved.
In my talk with Michael Saylor, it was a true story. A couple weeks before that talk, I said, over kind of the 2015 to 2020 period, if a client asked me, what's the probability of Bitcoin going to zero? That was a legitimate, real conversation. If a client asked me that now, and I mentioned this with Michael Saylor, I'd say, what's the probability of Christianity going to zero? It's just not happening. The train has left the station, the toothpaste is out of the tube, it is not going to zero. So, statistics. You think about distribution with an enormously asymmetric right tail, this huge possible upside. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it could happen. And you chop off the left tail of zero, the mean explodes. The mean explodes. So not making a decision to adopt the Bitcoin standard is very active. And the point really is that whether you make the decision as a CEO or whether you make the decision as a portfolio manager actively, or you ignore it, therefore don't make it passively, you've made it. You've made it. And I think you've made it with very high consequence.
It's like, when can I get this? Like, what's the timing on this?
Nothing's fast in banking. I would think you'll see the beginning baby steps of a rollout Q4, and really 2022 will be the year of bank after bank after bank enabling their customers to buy Bitcoin, to get Bitcoin rewards on their credit cards, and additionally to get interest in Bitcoin. Now that's meager, but it's non-zero. I had an experience this past Saturday where the heads of 3 of the largest central banks in the world wanted to talk about US inflation and Bitcoin with me. And so, you could get a dustpan, so I'm not going to name drop, pick up all the names I drop here, but they wanted to talk about inflation. We spent 4 hours on it. Well, it's the ultimate risk on asset because as the money printer just goes brr, like the smoke is coming out of the machine. I don't mean just literally printing, but credit creation, which is really the same thing. Anything that is provably scarce, and we're seeing that in the inflation number today, but you could look at collectibles, you could look at lumber, you could look at tin, you could look at Bitcoin. It's hyperinflating. Or said differently, the US dollar, sadly, is in a hyperinflation against Bitcoin. It's not, what was the CPI reading, 4.7 or something like that, or 4.6? That's not the CPI against Bitcoin. The US dollar has depreciated 94% against Bitcoin since the beginning of 2019.
So let's talk about consensus versus non-consensus. And on the topic of central banks and reserve assets, what is the one thing that you think the market doesn't appreciate or where you think you are far from consensus?
That's a good question. Well, one topic that I like to think about is when a country will change their legal tender laws to adopt the Bitcoin standard, at least make it legal for paying bills, for paying taxes. And relatedly, when a central bank will purchase Bitcoin as part of the portfolio of reserves, right? So
in lieu of gold, in lieu of dollars, in lieu of...
Yeah, exactly. So legal tender laws allow Bitcoin and purchasing Bitcoin as a reserve asset. And I would guess that if we surveyed the audience today and we said, what's the probability that one or two of those things happen, the legal tender or the reserve, in the next 10 years, I'm guessing, I don't know, about 50%, 50-50, whether in the next 10 years, one or two of those things happen. If you ask me what's the 50-50 point, at which point is it a 50% chance that one of those two things happen, I'd say 12 months. In the next 12 months, 50-50.
12 months.
Correct. 12 months. Now, it's 50-50, it's not 90-10, but it's not 2% either. If you ask me what's the 50-50 point, at which point is it a 50% chance that one of those two things happen, I'd say 12 months. In the next 12 months, 50-50.
12 months.
Correct.